back, everyone, to another episode of The Lockdown featuring our guest, Jamie Campbell, who is the host of Blue Jay Central on Sportsnet. Jamie, how's it going?
I'm well, Brandon. You?
Keeping it going in these times, of course.
I need a haircut.
We all do.
Look at this mane.
Oh,
it's not too bad.
You got the flow. Going.
You got a big baseball flow going. I don't know nothing about baseball, but the cap with the hair coming out like that.
That's okay. I don't know anything about basketball, so that makes us even.
Well, I'm a big soccer guy, so.
Oh, are you? Okay.
Yeah. All right. So obviously, Jamie, the pandemic has hit us all, and you're not on TV as much as you would have liked these days. So how has your life taken a hit, and how have you adapted to practicing your craft at home?
I haven't practiced the craft other than to do things like this, which keeps me certainly immersed in the business, if this is the business and the future of it right here. But I have been busy doing other things, volunteering to drive PPE to frontline workers for Conquer COVID-19, and an initiative that I began way back on the 16th of March now. And that was to call people who might have been in lockdown at that time, who were fans of the Blue Jays and have been for many, many years. And that's been a very rewarding task as well. So incredibly, I have been busier without baseball than if I was working broadcasts every single day.
And what have those phone call conversations been like for you? Because I know we were talking to you last week on another call on Sports Talk, and you were saying that, a lot of the people that you're calling are a little bit more in like the older demographic, and, during this time, it's a lot harder for them. It's a lot scarier for them, and a lot of them are big baseball fans. So what kind of relationships have you built with those phone calls? What kind of friends have you made?
Jesse, it's been incredible. It began mostly in speaking with seniors who were dealing with the pandemic the best way they knew how. And in many respects, they were all accustomed to being locked in anyway. They'd be over the ages of 65 or 70, and in many respects, were sort of accustomed to not being terribly active. So this whole process wasn't exactly strange to them. It's moved into a little more serious conversations for me now, because different people have started reaching out. Just today, I had a conversation with a 42-year-old man who just got notification that he has stage 4 liver cancer. He's got 2 kids. A friend of his reached out to me a couple of days ago and asked me to call him. And I take it from our conversation that the prognosis is not good. In fact, I was in his area near London, Ontario just yesterday, and contemplated trying to reach out to actually come and visit at the hospital, but hospitals are in lockdown. So it was a foolish thing to even think that I could do, but the thought was there. So I'm having conversations right now with people who aren't necessarily senior citizens, but who are going through extremely difficult times. In fact, I just recently was on delivery throughout southwestern Ontario, and through my phone calls had connected with someone who also knew a very young man, 52 years of age, who has been given about 4 or 5 weeks to live, lives in Brantford, Ontario, and his son is quite the baseball fan. So I actually drove to their house yesterday and stood outside in the driveway and talked to them, and we'll probably go back next week when he is relocated from the hospital to the home, so that he can spend his final days at home. So it's a heavy time, really. It's easy to wake up every day and plan to do a baseball broadcast. It's not easy waking up every day phoning complete strangers who in some respects are in grave trouble. And luckily I'm feeling strong enough right now to be able to do it. So I'll keep doing it as long as I can.
Jamie, I think that's incredible that you're just taking the time to journey with people through some really difficult situations. For yourself, what's one thing that you've learned from all of this?
That's a good question, Nick. I hope that we find a bit of a different world when we get out of this. If we get out of this, and I don't mean that, you know, the existence of the planet is in jeopardy. I mean that, you know, maybe we're going to have to live with COVID-19 for the rest of our lives in some form, and maybe spacing ourselves out at grocery stores will become routine as opposed to, you know, a mandated thing that we're all going to have to do for a few months. So I guess I've learned, one, how to deal with a pandemic as best as I can, and as best as I can with 2 young children as well. I have gained an appreciation, and I hope at some point in your 3 careers that you experience this too, that, you know, you've all chosen to pursue this career as I did when I was your age. And I never knew that at some point in my lifetime, I would have the power, based on what I do professionally, to be able to pick up a phone and call complete strangers who don't see me as a stranger because I'm on their TV every night of the summer, and I'm a familiar voice and have been for many years. So that's a privilege that I feel, being able to do that, to be able to connect with people who are experiencing some low times right now, which is something I would not have been able to do if I had chosen veterinarian sciences or engineering or something like that. I chose to be a broadcaster 35 years ago. And now I'm feeling the privilege that's associated with the job in being able to brighten up people's lives in some way just by being part of their lives.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Like you just said, you know, you have the power and the privilege to reach out and impact these people's lives. And that's something that, you know, as a 22-year-old kid, I've always wanted to do. And, you know, you find ways to do it. But like you said, you're on TV and people know who you are. They might not know you personally, but
yeah,
they'd love to just hear your voice, you know?
Well, you know, Brandon, through my association with Conquer COVID-19, I've become associated indirectly with the actor Ryan Reynolds. We don't know each other. We are now part of the same volunteer organization. And I heard him say not long ago that if you're granted any form of celebrity and you don't use that celebrity properly, then you're wasting it. And I've always believed that. I've always known that, you know, and whatever celebrity, and I hate the word, that I've attained in doing what I do for a living is obviously not comparable to his, based on the fact that he's an A-list movie star. But there is a level that I have that if I'm not out there using it properly and trying to positively impact the lives of the people who watch our baseball broadcast, then what good am I, right? It's almost like Jackie Robinson, who is a baseball player I have respected since I knew of his existence. His epitaph reads, and I quote, "A man or woman's life is worthless but for the impact it has on other men or women." Meaning, you got a chance to make an impact on other people, do it. Because really, when you think about it, why else are we here? Are we here to lounge around and enjoy the fruits of the earth and really not positively impact other people? I guess, if that's what you choose to do. But my focus is on, okay, every single day I wake up thinking, what have I been given that I can now turn around and give to somebody else? And getting into this industry, when I decided to do that back in 81 or 82, when I was a stupid curly-haired, freckle-faced kid, not knowing exactly how I was going to do it, but figured it out anyway. I never knew back then that you know, one day I would have the ability to connect with people across the country, complete strangers, and utilize this celebrity this way.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna touch upon next, is that, you know, your journey from where you started to where you began, you had to move a couple of times. So do you just want to touch on, you know, maybe give advice to students who, you know, they might not want to move to the smaller market or move away from home, but how has your experience been with that? What did that do for you?
I never wanted to. I resisted it for the longest time. I think things have changed for your generation. And what I mean by that is back in the late 80s, there were a lot of small stations out there that had sports departments, vibrant sports departments, and staffs of 3 or 4 or even 5 sports reporters and anchors. So there was an opportunity there. I used to like to call it the minor league system. And unfortunately, that minor league system has dried up tremendously. And I know the 3 of you know that, and anybody else that's watching this knows that. And I feel terrible that it has, because those are opportunities that if I hadn't had would not have gotten me to where I am now. So I resisted it for the longest time, but I figured out when I was about 22 or 23 that, yeah, in fact, you do need to go somewhere. And I got a gift of an opportunity in Edmonton in 1993, a place I'd never previously been to before. So I packed up my Honda Prelude and never forget driving away from Oakville. I had the speakers sort of bulging out of the back window, and I was going through Chicago on my first day. And I thought, boy, if I make it out of Chicago with everything still in the car, I think I'm doing well. And that began a 4-year journey in Edmonton where I did weekend sports for CBC and learned the trade and made all the mistakes that I could in front of a limited audience. And it was a really critical part of my development as a broadcaster.
I remember last week when you were speaking, you talked about like the big changes in the sports industry and how when you were first starting off in your career in sport media, you were able to kind of focus on one specific skill and hone in on that craft. And you spoke about how now times have kind of changed. So how important is it now to be versatile and flexible in the different skill set that you have?
Another good question, Jesse. And this one's hard for me to really pinpoint, and I'll tell you why. So back in 1989, when I graduated from RTA at Ryerson, I think there were about 125 grads. There were 4 of us, 4 that wanted to be in sports, which isn't possible today. A class of a 125, I bet you there are 50 people in a class now of 125 that would want to be in sports. One of them ended up as a convicted bank robber. So that's a bit of a side story, but either way, I think what I meant by saying that you have to be sort of multi-purpose now is that there are so many different forms of media. There are ways to present yourself on Instagram, Twitter, things I've never even heard of, like something called TikTok that I know nothing about. And like all of these forms of media, back when I was trying to break into the industry, it was radio and television and nothing more. So I knew back then that I can say, here's what I want. Here's what I'm working towards. I'm going to put the blinders on and I'm going for it. And I want to be a television broadcaster. And it was easy. And now I'm 52 years old. I can't even tell you what kinds of platforms you 3 currently enjoy. I wouldn't know half of them. And I would be completely lost if I was in your shoes right now. Because I wouldn't know how to put myself out there and show myself to the world and prove my ability. I wouldn't know. I'm kind of glad, I developed in the 80s so that I had a chance. So my best advice to anybody who's in your shoes watching this and listening to this is take advantage of what you know. Find that inner talent. It's got to be in there somewhere and you know it. It's why you signed up for this. And just be prepared for rejection. I got lots of it. I still have every letter that was ever sent to me that said, no, thank you. We appreciate your demo tape, Jamie, but we're not hiring, or it's not good enough, or. Just be ready for it and don't take it too seriously, because at some point an opportunity is going to present itself. And when it does, run with it. And, here's hoping for great things that follow.
And it's so true, Jamie. Like there's so much opportunity there for us, which is great, but then it's really hard to, hone down what we actually want to do and figure out where our skill sets are going to align. I know for myself, I wanted to be on air like most people coming into the program. And I quickly realized and pivoted that maybe that's not what I want to do, but then, it's always in the back of my head. For people who do want to be on air though, particularly what has been your experience managing public expectations of you and like becoming that public figure and celebrity that you previously mentioned?
Well, first of all, and I hate to say this because most people probably wouldn't tell you to set your expectations low. But what I did when I came out of Ryerson was I figured if I get to a local TV station and establish myself as a sports anchor in local television, then I've done well. And that's where I set my, my ambition. So when I got to local TV and established a reputation in local TV, that's when I refocused my goals and thought, oh, okay, well, now maybe I should push, say, CBC Sports or TSN because Sportsnet didn't exist at that time. Maybe there's an opportunity at some point there. And then I just set yet another goal. I think it's dangerous to say, you know what, one day I'm going to be the host of Hockey Night in Canada. Because if you don't get to that point, you'll only disappoint yourself. So it's really critical to say, here's an attainable goal, and then go for it and push yourself and try and get to that place so that at least you're happy. And at least, you know, you've satisfied yourself in that respect. As far as, you know, establishing a trust with the public, it's a delicate balance. You have to be awfully careful about things that you say and how you present yourself. I've been in situations in the past where I've said things. I frankly said something, I'm not going to elaborate on it, but the first year that Sportsnet ever existed, I said something on the air that frankly should have gotten me fired, but nobody heard it because it was on a late night show and we were a brand new network and the internet Twitter didn't exist at that point. So nobody really caught wind of it. And there were never letters written to the network to complain. And I managed to avoid what probably should have been, you know, dismissal. It wasn't racist. It wasn't homophobic. It was just downright rude. Not proud of it, but it was a huge mistake that I made and I got away with it. And you know, young people, just be careful what you put out. I mean, there's an NHL player recently, I forget his name, who, you know, got caught up in something that's really been ruinous to his career. You look how quickly people's careers can be destroyed now with the various forms of media and various platforms. You just got to be oh so careful about what you say and how you present yourself to the world.
Yeah, 100%. My dad's always told me that since day one. Always, you know, as soon as he wouldn't let me get Facebook till I was about 15 years old because he was just so paranoid, you know.
Yeah.
But at some point, you just got to do it. Well, my question to you is obviously, I'm assuming you're a big Blue Jays fan? Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah. Well, my question is, obviously, you know, you're born in an outskirt in Toronto, big Blue Jays fan, and now you're the host of their show during their games. So how awesome is that, like, realistically?
You know how awesome it is? It's when it's the middle of August and the Blue Jays are 25 games out of first place and it's 90 degrees and I'm wearing a suit, you know, and you can feel the beads of sweat rolling down the shirt and the TV lights are shining on you, which makes it feel more like 100 degrees. And there are people barking at you from beyond the barriers near the cameras about how the team's brutal or you're brutal or I don't know, and your phone's ringing because one of your kids is sick and, you know, you should probably be home, but it just went into the 14th inning and this game's not going to end anytime soon. Every single time that happens, I throw myself back to 1977 and 78 and 79 and 80 and 81 when I was this little kid going to these games religiously, dreaming about being part of it. And it makes all of those so-called difficult moments not only manageable, but downright enjoyable. So you'll never hear me complain. You'll never hear me feel like I'm not grateful for what I've been able to achieve and where I sit professionally, because there's not a day that goes by that I don't think about how lucky I am to be doing something that I set out to do when I was about 12 or 13 years old.
Hopefully that's something that we can get back to very soon if baseball does come back. And that's kind of where I want to ask the next question. So with summer around the corner, you know, normally the NBA, NHL, NFL, they're all kind of in the off season, and baseball really has the opportunity to take center stage.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen some success like in the Korean League with bringing baseball back and being able to practice social distancing measures. How much hope does that give Major League Baseball and other baseball leagues to hopefully have some sort of baseball being played this summer?
You know, the greatest hope, Jesse, for baseball is because of the distancing, the physical distancing that you see on a baseball field. It almost makes it plausible that the game could return at some point. Whereas, you know, if you're a hockey or basketball fan, and we know, given that it's the middle of May, we're kind of at the end of those seasons anyway, it's hard to see because of physical proximity how those leagues are going to be able to return and safely play. That said, baseball at this moment isn't where it needs to be in terms of the agreement between the players and owners, and we knew it was coming. There's a major disagreement on how they're going to split the revenues. The owners are saying, and probably rightly so, that they're going to lose a lot of revenue based on the fact that there won't be anybody in the stands buying tickets and hot dogs and beers. Whereas the players are saying, well, you know, that shouldn't impact the contracts that we have legally signed and affect the salaries that we are rightfully owed. So until they can come to an agreement where everybody's happy, and then they can go forth and say, okay, and how are we going to do this with the best interests of the players in mind? And how are we going to do this so players, trainers, coaches, umpires, anybody that has to be associated with a game day is safe? And if that can be done, then you'll see baseball. And I'm hopeful because it's getting to the point where, people are, you know, they're running out of things to watch on Netflix. They're tired of tuning into the news every night and basically seeing the same thing. And that is, what's the latest development in the pandemic? I think a live sport like baseball, especially baseball because it's every single day, would be great for people who need a bit of a diversion. It has to be done, though, safely, so that there is limited, if not no risk to those who are participating.
For sure. And, you know, there's a Last Dance documentary going on right now that's kind of keeping, you know, basketball fans excited in the meantime. And I know there's a Roy Halladay documentary coming out soon on ESPN. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering, I'm not sure off the top of your head how much you did cover Roy, but I'm just wondering, you know, one of the big things that they push in the trailer is this idea of his perfectionist like mindset as a pitcher. And I'm just wondering from your perspective, what did you see in Roy when you covered him?
I was the play-by-play man from 2005 to 2009, and those were 5 of Roy's best years. In one of those seasons, he won 20 games. I think he was an all-star every year that I was on the microphone. So I got to see him every 5th day. You know, the funny thing about Roy is that there's nobody in the media that can say they got close to him because he phased pretty well everybody out that wasn't an immediate member of his family. And that includes teammates. In fact, my old broadcast partner, Greg Zahn, who was his catcher most days for about a 3-year span, used to get mad at Roy because even on days that they were starting together, Roy would kind of give Greg the cold shoulder occasionally when in fact they had to sit down and study hitters and go over game film and establish a game plan. And Greg would get mad at Roy for trying to exclude him from the process. He's kind of critical when he's catching his pitches. So I used to marvel at the way Roy Halladay went about his day to day. In spring training, if you wanted to speak with him, you had to make an appointment with him. You couldn't just walk up and say, hey, how are things, and spend 20 minutes by his locker. You literally had to go and say, when's a good time for you to give me 20 minutes? And if you really wanted to see something incredible, you'd show up at the spring training facility at 5:30 in the morning, and Roy would already be in the gym under the bar, lifting weights or doing leg extensions or doing whatever. He was maniacal in that respect. And that's probably that sort of single-minded focus that he had is most definitely the reason the guy's in the Hall of Fame and should be.
That's awesome.
I was going to touch upon your play-by-play days. What is your, you have some iconic calls. What's your most favorite call, and what is the story behind it, let's say?
I don't have many iconic calls. The Blue Jays weren't the greatest team in my 5 years. I don't have one that I remember. I have one that I butchered that I remember, and I'm not proud of it. I don't think there's one that I remember. It was just a joy to be part of it for 5 years. I'd love to do it again if the opportunity presented itself. I don't know if it will, but I'd certainly consider it if Buck Martinez or Dan Shulman or any of those guys decided they wanted to step aside for a little while or give up 20 games. I just really enjoyed being able to show up every day, whether it was at the Rogers Center or Fenway Park or Safeco Field or Wrigley Field or Dodger Stadium or any of those places, even on cold, ugly days in Detroit and Cleveland. It was still such a pleasure to be able to sit in that broadcast booth with Pat Tabler or Rance Mullenix or Darren Fletcher and call Major League Baseball games. It was a dream come true. I wish I could tell you there's one particular play that I fondly remember, but there isn't one.
And you just spoke about Buck Martinez and Dan Shulman, and I remember, I think it was last year, Dan Shulman coming to speak to our class, and as soon as he came to the class and you heard him speak, like it sounded like he was born to call sports. Like his voice, that was just something that I remembered so much. But I wanted to stick with the play-by-play. So you've been able to do play-by-play as well as host different shows, and people hear the word on air a lot, and it's a really broad term. So do you think there are any, like what skills can relate to all sides of on air, from play-by-play to color commentary to hosting?
There are many. Being well-researched and well-read, knowing your subject matter is critical, obviously. I like to employ the idea that if you slow your pace in anything that you're saying at any time on the air, and I'm sure all three of you have done a number of presentations where you feel supercharged because you're in this little box and maybe there's some light shining and you've got a microphone and you're supposed to do a broadcast or do a highlight show or do a podcast or do an interview like this one, where your energy is so high that everything that comes out of here comes out a little quicker than it should. And I've always found, and I told Joe Siddle this when he joined me as my co-host on Blue Jay Central, if you pull it back by about half a second every time, it allows your brain or your mouth to catch up with your brain. So whatever it is you want to get out comes out so much clearer if you slow your pace right down and deliver it accordingly. And I subscribe to that as often as I possibly can. There are times when I forget it, like opening day when the Rogers Center's got 47,000 people and, and 1,000 of them are standing around our set on the 100 level, and it's an energy that's unmistakable. And sometimes you get on the air and you want to just push because there's so much time that you have. I'm one who believes taking a deep breath. You know who was a master at it? And unfortunately, he's not part of our network anymore, is Bob McCown. If you ever listen to Bob McCown on the radio, there would be times when you'd be driving along and you'd wonder if maybe the radio signal just died because you're not hearing anything. And that was just Bob either formulating a thought or allowing that pause, that silence to really impact either what he just said or what he's about to say. And it's magical. And it's hard to teach, frankly. It's not something you can teach. It's just something you have to recognize on your own. And I encourage, now that you're all sort of in the infancy of your careers, to think about it, practice it, but more so understand the value of it, and understand that when that opportunity comes along for you to do radio, TV, or whatever form of media you'll end up being, that being able to just breathe while you're talking and allow whatever's up here to come through clearly here, it'll just make you a much better broadcaster.
Totally agree with that. Pronunciation, enunciation, it's all critical. And like you said, just leaving that silence there can be so effective. And we've heard historic calls, even in the Michael Jordan documentary as well, just be so phenomenal. Well, my question to you is now, like you said, when you were doing your play-by-play, and obviously this still happens and every sport is different, the sideline reporter as well. Do you think that, how long would it take for broadcasts to send out play-by-play people to other stadiums, or even have them in the stadium? Like, well, how do you think it's all going to go down? Is the sideline reporter still going to be a thing?
Not this year. I can't see if, as an example, if Blue Jays baseball returns, let's say July the 4th, what will those broadcasts look like? Well, if they're neutral site, say the Blue Jays, because Canada hasn't opened its borders yet, are having to play home games out of Tropicana Field in St. Petersburg, Florida, then I'm going to guess that Buck Martinez, who lives in Clearwater, will either be on site in an empty stadium, and Pat Tabler, who lives in Cincinnati, will either be with him or be on a headset at home, and they'll broadcast the game that way. There's also a chance that every game, regardless of where it's being held, is broadcast from our studios, which are in downtown Toronto. It's something that's been done before, so during a pandemic, it would be done again. It's called a home, or you take basically a raw feed of the broadcast that's being fed out of that particular stadium, and you call the play-by-play over top of the pictures that you see. So I have a hard time seeing broadcasters on site if things begin in July. Personally, I would love it, given that there's a lot of distance between me and Joe Siddle. If they end up playing their home games at the Rogers Center, if we'd still be able to go down, sit in our set, even though there's no fans, we're out of the way, we're way up in left field anyway. We sit 6 feet apart from each other. There's only 1 or 2 camera people around. You know, we wouldn't be a risk, I don't think, to each other. But I'm not at liberty to be able to make those decisions. I'd just like to see baseball return in some way safely first, and then we'll worry about how they're going to be broadcast after that.
100%. And just a couple of fun questions here. Obviously, you don't know this, but I'm from Montreal, and the Expos have, they have a legacy, and there's always talk about them coming back, this and that. And, more people own Expos jerseys than half the teams in the league. So do you think the Expos are actually going to return at any point, especially with this coming in?
I do. Yeah, I really do. There's a really strong foundation led by the Bronfmans in Montreal that wants to make it happen at some point. And I think if the drive is there to do it, and there is a franchise or two, notably Tampa Bay, looking for ways to survive in whatever form they can. And if that's sort of a hybrid Montreal, Tampa Bay way, I'm not sure that works. I'm kind of amazed at the concept, to be honest with you. And I can't imagine what a player would feel if, the starting shortstop for the Montreal Rays, how they would manage in 2 cities as a home base. I'm not quite sure how that would all work out, but yeah, I do see baseball returning to Montreal at some point. And I know we've been talking about it for about 10 years now, but it proved to be a very good baseball city. Some of the things that happened at the end there were not the fault of the people that live in Montreal. It was just ownership and baseball as a whole seemed to conspire to get them moved to Washington eventually. So yeah, I can definitely see it happening sometime soon. They're going to need another ballpark to play in, though.
100%.
It can't be Olympic Stadium. It might be temporarily Olympic Stadium, but it can't be Olympic Stadium long term.
And Jamie, last question before we let you go is, what is the first thing that you want to do when all of this is said and done and we go back outside?
Well, I won't tell you what that is because it's probably X-rated. I haven't even thought of it. I mean, I'm still getting outside. I've got my 2 kids with me. I don't know. I was supposed to take my children to the Indy 500. It was a family tradition. My dad established first back in 1964, 65. And then when he had kids, he thrust it upon us. And this was my year. I had actually booked it off and was going to drive my 2 boys down to Indianapolis on the May long weekend. So I don't know. It would just be neat to one day go to a sporting event again with 40, 45,000 people. In this case, 300,000 people. But Yeah, I haven't thought about that. That's a good question. I haven't really thought about what I want to do when we're free to go, because I don't think it's going to be, and I'm sure you guys agree, it's not just going to be one day when we're going to wake up and say, hey, this is over. Everybody outside, see you at the beach. It's not going to be that way. It's just going to be this gradual, now I'm used to being able to walk into a bookstore. Now I'm used to be able to attend church. You know, it's going to be so gradual. It's hardly going to be noticeable.
Yeah, for sure. Jamie, so we want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us. I know I speak for Brendan and Nick when I say the phone calls you're making every day are making a big difference. It's really amazing. So thank you for your time, and we hope to see you on Blue Jay Central very, very soon.
Thank you, three, for having me, and I wish you guys the best of luck. You've chosen a magnificent career.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.